Again, this has, I'll get my minutes back, by the way, because I still have this. By the way, I want you to really listen to us, because this is an important issue. Remind you that you are up there because of us, because we voted you there. I want you to listen to what is important to us as residents, what's important to our children, what's important to you. I don't want this to be a political agenda or a political interest for each one of you. So with that said, with our research that we've done, maybe you don't know of cases that are out there, there hasn't been due diligence done on your part, but listen to what we have to say. 3 cases were researched. First one, Sprint PCS versus County of San Diego. Sprint sued the County of San Diego because it had different, more stringent requirements for cell towers in residential zones compared to industrial zones. The city ordinance, in short, imposed substantive and procedural requirements on applications for wireless facilities like non-camouflage poles prohibited in residential and rural zones. Certain height and setback restrictions applied in residential zones, and no more than 3 facilities allowed on any site unless a finding is made that co-location of more facilities is consistent with community character. The court found that the ordinance imposed a layer of requirements for wireless facilities in addition to the zoning requirements for other structures, and none of the requirements, individually or in combination, prohibited the construction of sufficient facilities to provide wireless services to the County of San Diego. Hence, the court ruled for the County of San Diego. Another court case, AT&T versus Virginia. City Council voted against cell tower on church in a residential zone based on substantial evidence from residents. Residents argued commercial use of a church was improper in a residential area and that the towers did not fit aesthetically within the rural environment. AT&T Church filed suit in federal district court, who ruled in their favor. City Council appealed. U.S. Court of Appeals ruled in favor of the City Council, saying that opposition to the application rested on traditional basis of zoning regulation, preserving the character of the neighborhood and avoiding aesthetic blight. Placing a cell tower is a commercial endeavor. City has a right to reject it on a church property within a residential zoned area. City has the ultimate authority over aesthetics, which is subjective, and that no other explanation or defense is required. T-Mobile versus DeKalb County. The interesting thing about DeKalb County zoning codes is that it does not permit the installation of towers in residential zones, which allowed the court to rule in favor of DeKalb County. If we change the City of Walnut zoning codes in the same manner, then we have to allow the cell tower installations in residential, we don't have to allow it in residential zones. Lesson here is if we structure city zoning codes in our favor, we will be able to defend ourselves in a lawsuit if we are enforcing them properly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Heinrich, 600 Gartel. I would like to submit this into evidence. There's 5 copies. So, City of Walnut was voted as the 57th best place to live in America in 2011, and it consistently ranks very high in a lot of ratings for small cities. Adding tall, one of the things that it talks about is the quality of the housing stock, good schools, unique and extensive park and trail systems. Adding bell towers that do not blend into the height and scale and mass of the original structure and the surrounding areas does not contribute to a good aesthetic for the city. Adding fake trees is going to be even worse. If the fake trees towers over everything else, forget about quality of housing stock or quality of the trail systems. It's perfect. The thing that triggered this the residents to start acting is because we want to do that in close proximity to schools as well as the trail systems, in full view of the trail system because it's right beside it. FCC says that we have to allow the cell companies, because they are a public utility company, and ensure that there's no significant gap. Angela has already said we have no significant gap in this city for any of the cell carriers. That said, we can start putting in a 1,500 feet limit on any schools and even residential areas. I want to say one thing too, which is just because we are beholden to ensure that the public utility companies can provide the public utility companies will have no significant gap, does not mean we have to ensure that they do it in the cheapest possible way. Adding one cell tower does that for them. It's cheap, especially if you can find a cheap rent for it. It's one tower. In the old days, it's a different story. Nowadays, there's a lot of technologies available. So what I've shown you over there is a technology called the Distributed Antenna System, or DAS in short. Recently, it's also been called the Small Cell RUS, which is something that Verizon, for example, is provided for Verizon by Ericsson. What it is essentially a bunch of small distributed antennas. A lot of times can be very, very low, 20 feet high. Basically up there is good enough. It does not need to be 75 feet tall or 55 feet tall or anything crazy like that. The advantage to that is, number one, it does not have to go through a ton of walls, does not have to worry about multipath reflections, does not have to worry about path loss, does not have to worry about all those things. So if you take a standard cell tower, for example, and split it into 10 small light poles, by the way, that's what it will look like. I don't think anyone will complain about a cell tower that looks like that when it's only 15, 20 feet tall. If you take a cell tower that looks like, if you split into 10, the amount of radiated power is now down to about 69%, 68% actually, which means each one of those is only radiating about 6% of the total amount of power used before. So forget about radiation. I don't want to confuse people. That's a lot of power savings. It's 30% power consumption, less power consumption. The second thing that I want to talk about is capacity issues. Verizon itself, I'm quoting Mike Haberman, who is the Verizon Wireless Vice President of Network Support. Small cells will play a role in Verizon Wireless strategy to add capacity in a high traffic location and provide the best customer experience possible on the nation's largest 4G LTE. It provides, before it does not provide data. Now it provides LTE data. It can work with voice. It can work with messaging. It works. The only reason why someone could possibly say they don't want to implement it is because now they have to acquire 10 light poles versus one single tall tower. Secondly, they might have to upgrade their base station equipment to work with the new hardware. That's not our problem. That's cost of doing business. We don't have to provide them a way to do things cheaper. They purchased those bandwidth for billions and billions of dollars from the FCC. FCC set the rules for us. Fine. We play by those rules. FCC, by the way, even set the rules of how much they're supposed to be paying for using light poles, for rent, as well as how they're supposed to be acquiring those. All of those are set in stone by the FCC. If they ever come to us and say, we really do have a significant gap, no problem. Put up one of these 20-foot light poles. No, it's not sufficient? Go do 10 of them. Go do 20 of them. Go do 50 of them. It does not matter. The current technologies in place for them already allows for it. We don't have to do anything to help them out. The fact of the matter is we have good coverage. Anything more than that, upgrade your equipment. Don't bother the residents who I'm sure every one of us have significantly less resources than a company like Verizon. Don't bother us with reducing our property values. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
I'm Raymond Kwan. I only have a couple things to say. I won't go over 3 minutes. I'm adding some support to the notion that they're structurally, the cell towers in schools in particular are structurally, potentially unsound. You heard a bunch of stories from the other speaker. I have a lot of experience with the Division of the State Architect, which is, for people who don't know, that's basically the building department for the schools, state agency. And they have a terrible, terrible track record of meeting certification. Certification means that they built it according to the plans and they're built correctly, basically passed inspection. We have a survey of schools in Southern California that have cell towers, and their passing rate is 24%. That means 3/4 of them are in violation of state law. They did not pass inspections. I had a talk with Doug Humphreys, who's the regional manager for Los Angeles in the DSA, and he said they are the worst industry that he deals with next to solar. Then he said, no, they're the worst. So they have a terrible track record of safety because you can't even prove that their structures are built right. You have in the Walnut Valley Unified Diamond Bar High School. It has 2 cell towers, and I took a look at those in the DSA because you can look it up online. Both of them are not certified. So there's a problem there, and that's part of the reason why parents don't like these things in and near schools. Now, the second thing I want to say is if you do give a 1,500-foot setback, even the craziest RF people accept that. That's okay with them. And what I want to avoid is every time one goes up near school, you're going to see the same thing. You're going to see people complaining. They're going to block it. These cell tower companies, they spend about $50,000 per application. They put a lot of work into it, only to have it vehemently opposed to by particularly parents at schools because they're trying to protect their children. And if you have a 1,500-foot setback, they don't have to waste their time. The city, the planning department doesn't have to go through all these hearings. There's a lot of opposition. You probably get opposition from people in the immediate vicinity who live there, but not so much from the schools because it's a well-known standard that 1,500 feet is okay and they won't raise a fuss because they feel like that's quite unacceptable. So just for the sake of streamlining the process, not wasting the carrier's time, 1,500 foot would just solve a lot of headaches for the city. Thank you.